Your views, your vision.
On today's verdict, we sit down with an attorney from the Legal Aid Society to find out what rights you have if you have recently been arrested. Plus, do you have someone in your family that needs a living will, or maybe you want to designate someone to be your health care proxy? Well, we'll take a closer look at that and see what type of late in life directives you might need. Finally, we at today's verdict have a big anniversary coming up, and we might just give you a hint as to what it is. So, as you can see, we have much to get to. Stay right here. Today's verdict starts right now. Hello and welcome to today's verdict, the show that gives you your legal rights and options. I'm your host and trial attorney for the next 30 minutes, David Lesh. Well, we start off today's show with Legal Aid Society attorney and Bronxnet Access producer Crystal Parham. Crystal, very excited to have you.
Thank you.
All right, big fan of the Legal Aid Society, big fan. Not an easy job. Tell us a little bit about Legal Aid. For the viewers, what is Legal Aid?
Legal Aid is a non-for-profit organization that represents the underserved community. So basically, if you can't afford an attorney, attorneys are pretty expensive these days, I'll give you representation.
All right, so you provide representation if somebody can't afford a private lawyer.
That's correct. That's correct. So we do everything from arraignment all the way through trials.
Now, by the way, how are you contacted? Does the court contact you and let you know that somebody needs representation who's either in jail or someplace else? How do you end up actually meeting the defendant for the first time?
Well, we are scheduled different arraignment shifts, so we have to work about 8 arraignment shifts per quarter. So during that arraignment shift, whoever's in the back, meaning whoever's in the pens, we get the files, we interview them, and they become our clients.
Now, when you meet them, you meet somebody for the first time, are they usually appreciative that they're getting free representation? Do they have, are their expectations not met? Tell me a little bit.
Well, it's difficult because, you're meeting them for the first time. They're behind bars. They're very upset. And legal aid attorneys have a certain reputation amongst people that are incarcerated that, we're working with the prosecution, that we're not real lawyers, we're not a paid lawyer. So it's hard sometimes to gain the trust. And that's what I really try to work on in the beginning, is getting the trust.
And how do you do that?
Well, get them to calm down, and you try to get them to understand that you're there on their side. Because a lot of times what happens is they won't tell you the story, but they'll tell the police the story, they'll tell the prosecution the story, and you're the last to hear the story.
And it's so important for you to know everything because, and I tell my clients this too, even if you're embarrassed, you got to tell me everything so I know how to prepare for it.
Exactly. I tell them, it's like I'm Hercules going to battle with no arms. I need to have the whole story in order to craft a defense, in order to get discovery, in order to do investigations.
Let's take it a step back now. Somebody has the unfortunate situation that they're out in the community and they're being arrested. What advice would you give to somebody from the very beginning, very beginning, they're pulled over, something happens, what would you tell somebody who's watching and they're getting arrested?
Do not say a word. Do not speak to the police. They will try to get you to give them information. They'll tell you that they're going to let you go. But the reality is once the bracelets are on, you're going in through the system.
Well, what if they promise you, no, it's okay, you can tell me, it's better off if you tell me, maybe I'll let you go? No.
No, absolutely not. I've had so many clients write full confessions. I've had so many clients speak to prosecutors, give them videotape confessions, and then your case is dead in the water because you've already made a statement. So at trial, if you want to give a different statement, you're contradicting your earlier statement.
Now, I sometimes see in my office, I sometimes see police brutality cases where someone's arrested, they resist arrest, and it really just goes really poorly. Any advice you want to give to somebody else who also is, watching and, with respect to being questioned and getting a little tough with the police? I mean, you obviously should be very respectful to the police. Am I correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because I've seen cases like, for instance, obstruction of governmental administration, resisting arrest. harassment cases where actually the people shouldn't be arrested. But because they kind of talk back to the cops, you shouldn't have stopped me, you don't have any probable cause. And a lot of times that's absolutely correct. But that's not the time to address it.
All right. So now you've been, quote unquote, retained, and you meet the client for the first time. I guess we're starting the discovery phase. Am I correct? What exactly is going on during this time, really?
Well, usually what happens is I try to ascertain from the client whether there are witnesses, whether there are things I should be subpoenaing. Because in Manhattan, it's different from the other boroughs. We don't get discovery.
That's, by the way, where you're located.
That's where I'm located.
Okay.
So in other jurisdictions, you get the discovery. In Manhattan, you don't get it until you actually, the eve of trial. So when the people answer ready, that's when you get everything, which is really a backwards way of doing it. So we have to, under our own initiative, do our own investigation. So I usually start with an investigation. We have investigators in our office, and we try to find witnesses, and we subpoena videotapes, and we take photos, and we try to piece together a defense.
Now, in the meantime, where is the defendant?
It depends. If the defendant's lucky enough to get released on his own recognizance, the defendant's at home, going to work. But if there's bail set...
Okay, we talked about that. What if there's bail set?
If there's bail set, and if they cannot make the bail, then they're in custody.
And I think you have an issue with bail.
Well, the problem with bail is a lot of people, at least people that I represent, they cannot afford bail. So what happens is you have a lot of innocent people that are pleading guilty. And that sounds crazy, right? Who would do that?
Well, run us through. Why is that so? I don't understand.
Well, what happens is once you're arrested, you see the judge. The judge then decides to set $1,000 bail. You don't have $1,000 bail. You don't even have $200 to pay a bail bondsman. So then what you do is you sit in jail for about a week until you have your 170-70 day where you see the judge.
So what is 170-70 day, by the way?
That's the day where the prosecution has to convert the case.
Fine.
So if the case is converted, they pretty much always convert the case. The judge says, I'll give you time served, which means I will give you, if you plead guilty, I will give you the time that you have in, which means you go home.
Oh.
And they want to go home. They don't want to, and so they plead guilty. And that sounds crazy.
Well,
but
don't go anywhere. I got a lot more I want to talk to you about, including your own show that you do. But we have to take a quick break. But when we come back, we have much more to speak to Crystal about in her work with Legal Aid. Stay with us. Until we see you again, always remember, know your rights, know your issues, reach a verdict. We'll see you next time. Well, welcome back to today's verdict. I'm David Lesh. Remember to stay in touch with us on Facebook and Twitter, and you can always see past episodes on bronxnet.org. We've been talking to Crystal Parham about her work with the Legal Aid Society, and I want to get right back to that. Okay, so we're not too happy that, unfortunately, the defendant is stuck in jail, but you obviously have a job to do. You're getting the discovery, and at some point, we hopefully are moving into the trial phase. Let's talk about some trial preparation. What's going on in the courtroom?
Well, usually what happens, it takes several months to even get to the point that you're going to trial. So at that point, you've found your witnesses, you've done your subpoenas, you have your trial strategy, you have your defense. And a lot of times you prepare the defendant to testify, which every case that I've ever tried, my clients testified. And I think a lot of times it's important for the jury to hear from the client.
Why? Because sometimes you see the television programs, they always, a lot of times defendants don't testify. They feel, that it's only going to hurt them. Why should they testify? Or that's the legal advice. Why do you feel it's important to testify?
If they're able to withstand cross-examination, I think the jury always wants to hear from the defendant. During jury selection, they're asked, are you going to hold it against the defendant if they don't testify? But the reality is they say no.
But they might.
They want to hear from the defendant. So I prepare very early on so that they understand how to answer questions. They understand how to say yes or no, or maybe I don't remember. And I think that it gives them that human side. So the jury can see, look, this guy's not this really big, bad, scary person. He actually is like a human being that has a job, that has a family, And I think it helps.
Now, this is a tough question. I don't know if you can answer this, but do you see a trend in certain types of arrests, that seem to be more prevalent than others? I don't know, in types of misdemeanors or any types of felonies. What are you seeing that are coming through the door? You're like, oh boy, another one of these?
Well, in Manhattan, they have a lot of quality of life crimes. Now, they don't have those in the other jurisdiction, but it's kind of like,
Give me an example.
Putting your foot on the subway seat. People actually go to jail for that. They actually spend the night in jail for
They
that.
arrest you for that?
They arrest you for that.
I've never seen anyone arrested for that.
Crazy. Also, sleeping on the park bench, obstructing the park bench. These are quality of life crimes in Manhattan, and they bring people in all the time for these crimes. I guess what I really see is the courtroom is just full of people of color.
Oh.
That's what I really see.
But has it always been that way, or is it more so? That's what I really want to know.
Well, I think from the time I've been practicing, it's always been that way.
It's always been that way.
I mean, you might see, a Caucasian with DWI, maybe some drugs, maybe spousal abuse, but it's mostly people of color. I want to say like 95%.
And we talked about this a second before off camera. Stop and frisk is no longer. Did that seem to bring in much more people in terms of crimes? What did you find during that process?
Yeah, I mean, I think stop and frisk is alive and well. I tell my clients, if you're a person of color and you are above 110th Street, don't have a gravity knife on you, don't have drugs on you, don't have anything on you, because you're going to be stopped, whether there's probable cause or not. And if you have something on you, you're going to be taken in.
All right. So before I forget, I want to talk a little about your show. Tell us about the kind of stuff that you're talking about here at Bronxnet.
Well, I'm doing a show called Full Focus.
Okay.
And we always have a legal component. So we talk about, crime in the Bronx, or we talk about getting your spousal support. And then we also have like soft features. Like I was recently in Brazil.
Which I want you to tell the viewers about. How was that experience?
It was fantastic. It was amazing. We saw the USA-Portugal
So it was
game.
good, really?
Yeah.
It was pretty good.
It was,
okay. That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. So some of the legal topics, what are you talking about on your show?
Well, I'm talking about crime in the Bronx.
Okay.
Talking about, buying your first house. What are some of the legal pitfalls, to look for? I'm talking about identity theft crimes. Different things that, can affect the everyday person. We speak about it in a very, colloquial way. Not a lot of legalese.
Is there a time that it's on? Any particular time or?
As of right now, we don't have a time slot.
Okay.
But starting in September, it'll be on
We're
the
getting
air.
there. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Let's get back to the Legal Aid Society. Let's give some tips. Somebody's watching now, and you want to give some of the best tips you can give to somebody, 17, 18-year-old, he or she is watching, and you're like, oh, that's a good idea. I should listen to that so it doesn't happen to me. What would you say? Give some tips.
First thing, just always do not speak to the cops. That's like my first number one tip. Please do not speak to the cops. Second thing is, if a cop has stopped you and you think there's no probable cause and you're probably right, save it for later. Be respectful, do what they tell you, and they may not arrest you. The other thing I would say is, try to stay off the streets. Try to stay off the streets after a certain hour. That's when all the stuff goes down. I had a client who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time at about 2 in the morning. He was brought in for a robbery 2 charge, which is a violent felony. He was actually innocent, but because his family couldn't make the bail and the prosecutor wanted to do the investigation, he sat in jail for about 45 days. And he happened to just be in the wrong place, the wrong time, and wearing a hoodie. And it's unfortunate, but this happens all the time. So, I particularly care about these young men that are being stopped on a regular basis. So that's what I would say. Just make sure that if you're going to be stopped, you're going to be out, just don't have anything on you.
Yeah, I remember, and I'll just very quickly, when I was in law school, one of the criminal professors said if a police officer asks you to open up your trunk and you have nothing in it, but he doesn't have the right to ask you to open up your trunk, open up your trunk. Mm-hmm. Because you don't really, listen, they're there to help you, and don't make problems. It's probably not such a good idea.
Yeah,
you don't know where it ends.
I agree. I think if you can just keep it as friendly as possible, that's what you should do. I have a friend of mine who has been stopped for DWI multiple times, and somehow he's a person of color. He has not been arrested, and he's had like one or two drinks. You could smell it on his breath.
And you think he's just getting stopped because he is a person of color?
He's getting stopped because he's a person of color, but he's able to talk his way. He's very respectful. He's able to speak to the cops, and they say, "Okay, just get home safe."
That's a good lesson.
Yeah.
Okay. You're going to come back and another
Yes,
time and
definitely.
give us a little bit of update about your show
Thank
and how you're
you.
doing at Legal Aid.
Thank you so much.
All right, well, we have to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with today's verdict.
Hands can do incredible things. Now they can even help save a life with hands-only CPR. If you see an adult suddenly collapse, just call 911, then push hard and fast in the center of the chest until help arrives. Learn more at handsonlycpr.org.
This was me. And Mom and Dad. And my big brother Alex. And Jack. This was the day that I learned that sandals get their name from sand, and that the ocean is bigger than all of us. This was the day we all got to forget that I was sick. This was my wish.
All right, well, welcome back. Many of us never take the chance to prepare for our last stage of life, but a living will is important and can help others who are in the position to take care of you when you are no longer able to know exactly what your wishes are. And we have David Goldfarb, managing partner of Goldfarb, Brandt, Salzman, Kutzen LLP, on the line to tell us more about the importance of the different types of advanced directives. David, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right, this is a very, very important topic. Why do people wait so long before they finally decide that they should do something like a living will? What's the holdup?
I think a lot of people think that somebody else is going to be able to make the decision for them. They don't realize what will happen if they become disabled and can't make a decision about their health care needs, or they believe that a spouse or a child is going to be able to make those decisions. But the problem is that unless you have a written document directing who can make the decisions, they really can't. Sometimes the hospital doesn't know who to contact if they don't have a copy of the document, or a family member may not have the authority to make those kind of decisions, or there may be a dispute between two different family members.
Well, David, let's break it down. Let's start with a healthcare proxy, right? That seems to be the easiest. What is a healthcare proxy?
The healthcare proxy, which I believe is the most important of the documents, designates someone to make decisions for you if you can't. As long as you are competent, as long as you understand the nature and consequence, what you're suffering from, and the nature and consequences of accepting or refusing treatment, you can make those decisions yourself. But if you lack the capacity, if you through illness or you've been in an accident and you cannot direct a hospital or a doctor what to do, then the healthcare proxy designates someone who can make that decision for you. Now, it's also important to know in New York, you can only designate one person at a time. You can't say, I want my 3 children to make those decisions.
Well, does the second one invalidate the first one? Is that how it works?
No, I mean, it's just that you can't designate
Have multiple people make your decisions for you. It's not a group effort.
Right.
You can't
don't
have
want a committee sitting there and arguing
right.
about whether or not to do heroic efforts, put somebody on a respirator, something like that.
All right.
So you would designate maybe your spouse. If your spouse was unavailable, maybe one of your children to make those decisions.
Now, how is that different from a living will?
Well, a living will sets out what your directions are. It says, if I am in a coma with little or no chance of recovery, I do not want to be on a respirator. I do not want heroic efforts. I do not want this. I do want palliative care for pain, but I don't want the other things to be done. The problem with a living will is it's going to be interpreted by a stranger, a doctor or a nurse in a hospital who is not a member of your family, who you've not discussed it with. And most doctors will say, well, this says that there's little or no chance of recovery. We've had people who've been in comas for 6 months or a year, and they've recovered. That may not be what you want. Your family may know that if you are, if what you meant by little or no chance of recovery, but a doctor may not feel the same way. So we feel the most important thing is to have a healthcare proxy and name somebody as your agent and discuss with that agent what your wishes are.
Well, somebody comes to you, right? And the first thing they do, they sit down with you. What do you say? Do you ask for a whole list of their relatives, and do you give them like a form to fill out in terms of their wishes? How do you even start the ball rolling?
Whenever we do any kind of planning, whether they come in for a will, whether they come in for financial planning, we also always discuss with them saying, have you made these kinds of decisions? Have you written this down? If you haven't, you need to think about it. You need to come up with who will make the decisions, how they can be reached, if something should happen to you. Discuss your wishes with them, and then let's draw up a document where you say, I want my son to make the decisions. And in that document we put, I have discussed my wishes regarding feeding and hydration with my proxy, because under New York law, that person can make all the decisions except for feeding and hydration, unless and they can only make that decision if you've discussed it with them.
Now, what percentage would you say individuals do not have healthcare proxies and don't have living wills?
Well, it's getting a little bit better, but we go to a lot of meetings of even senior citizens, and when I ask them to raise their hands, if I get 40 or 50% that say they have these documents, I think that's a lot. Usually it may be 20, 30%.
Now, let's say it's too late, and when I say too late, the person is already incapacitated, right? They can't make their decisions. They can't tell the doctor what they want them to do. I understand there's this Article 81 proceeding. Could you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, first of all, there's two things. New York did pass a law a few years ago called the Family Healthcare Decision-Making Act.
Oh, okay.
Where it used to be that you were just out of luck, but they did pass a law where there is a hierarchy of people who could make those decisions. Now, it becomes a little bit more complex, and it may have to go to a hospital committee or something to make that to have it decided whether those people are appropriate and whether it's right. And it may not be the people that you necessarily wanted. So it's still important to have that proxy. But there is a family health care decision-making act where there can be. But one of the people in that list is somebody who has been appointed as your guardian.
Now, what does that mean? Because so the viewers understand. What is a guardian?
If you, again, we were talking about different kinds of planning. The health care proxy, a power of attorney, which handles financial matters. If you've done those things, hopefully you would not need a guardian. That person can just step in and make those decisions and carry on, paying your bills on one hand, making medical decisions. But if you didn't take those steps, it would come up to the point where you'd be in court. Somebody would say you lack capacity. Nobody can. Your bills are not being paid. Nobody's making decisions and giving directions to the doctors on what to do. So someone will go to court and ask them to appoint somebody as a guardian, which would be a guardian of your person or a guardian of your property.
Now, let's say you have somebody in your office who does have capacity. What are the problems you will run into later on with respect to some of these healthcare proxies or living wills? Are there still issues that are litigated, or
yes.
is it once you sign it, you're okay?
Yeah. Well, hopefully the person will be able to. I do tell clients. Yes. What do we tell clients? We say, make sure the person you're appointing can carry out your wishes. We have had people who appoint their loved ones, and the loved one says, I know mom has been in a coma for 6 months, and I know she would never want this, but I just can't bring myself to make the decision to terminate life support. So I think you have to know who you're appointing as your proxy.
Yeah, but by the way, though, getting back to that healthcare proxy, I know you can't have two people, but can you designate a successor if one is not available? You can do that.
Yes, you can designate a successor and a second successor. So as long as it's one person at a time, you can have them acting.
I can't keep you here for much longer. So do me a favor, give me some of the best tips you can give to somebody who's watching right now with respect to preparing for late in life stages.
Well, we tell someone if there's one thing you should walk away from after I've spoken to them is that you should get a healthcare proxy and a power of attorney in place. Make sure, especially with the power of attorney now, it's a very technical document. It's been revised a couple of times in the last few years. You have to use the right document. So it may be better. You can't just get a form and fill it out yourself. You really have to go to someone who's experienced in the field, like an attorney or someone who will help you fill out the power of attorney form. And it's also a very powerful document where they can make a lot of decisions in handling your funds, so you want to be very careful about it.
Yeah, let's talk about the power of attorney because we haven't gotten into that too much. And I have clients who are always coming into my office telling me about these powers of attorney, and I look at them and I'm like, do you even know what a power of attorney is? So why don't you tell the viewers what a power of attorney is, if you could?
Again, it is a document that says that my agent may handle these affairs for me. Now, and that is paying your bills, making real estate transactions. It could be making even some personal decisions regarding family matters. I mean, there's a whole list of things that they can do. It's stock, maybe they can buy and sell stock for you that you have. So anything that handles, it's usually your financial affairs. And again, on a power of attorney, you can have two people, and you can say whether they can act separately or have to act together. So you can it's a little bit different than the healthcare proxy in that respect. The ones that we use are called a durable power, and that means it used to be the standard power of attorney. When you lose capacity, it goes out of effect. So if you designate somebody and you become injured and can't decide, they can't. The durable power of attorney says in the document that even if I become incapacitated, my agent can act. Now there's one called a springing power that says my agent can't act until I become incapacitated. At that point, a doctor can say that I no longer have capacity, and the agent can take up an act on my behalf. So it is very important that you decide what you want, who you trust, who can handle your affairs, and you have this power of attorney there. It is as I said, the agent has broad powers. There's also another provision in New York law that says you can execute a gift rider at the same time that you execute the power of attorney.
And what is a gift rider?
The gift rider says that the person can make gifts and transfer property on your behalf. So if you have a pattern of giving money to your family and your children every year for tax purposes, you may want them to be able to transfer property out of your name for different, asset protection purposes later on. You may want to be able to, if you have to go on Medicaid and you want to protect your home, you may want them to be able to deed your home to your spouse or to somebody else. So a gift rider would give somebody the authority to do those kinds of things.
Well, David, good stuff. You gave us some great advice, and I think the best advice is to come and see you to get themselves a power of attorney and a living will. Thanks again for being here.
Okay, thank you.
All right, well, that's all for tonight. It's time to deliberate. I'd like to thank our guests for joining us and, of course, you for watching. Remember, if there's a legal issue or topic you would like to see on the show, email me at davidlesh@bronxnet.org. And until we see you again, always remember, know your rights, know your issues, reach a verdict. We'll see you next time.